So, speaking now about Russiagate, you won an Izzy Award for your reporting on the Russiagate hoax. It's hard to believe now that was almost a decade ago, but with Trump back in the White House, can you tell us about your reporting on that story and how it affected the political and media landscape in America?
Well, during the 2016 presidential campaign, the Hillary Clinton camp decided that they wanted to frame Trump as a Russian agent. And they paid a firm called Fusion GPS, who in turn hired a former British spy called Christopher Steele to write up a dossier full of conspiracy theories, which was then handed to the FBI in early July 2016. And a few weeks later, the FBI opened up an investigation of the Trump campaign for conspiring with Russia. The FBI claims that the Steele dossier had nothing to do with their decision, but the predicate that they based the investigation on is ridiculous. And it's so obvious what was going on. Victoria Nuland, who was serving in the State Department at the time, longtime State Department bureaucrat, neocon, married into the Kagan family, a family of neocons, she facilitated the FBI's receipt of the Steele dossier. And it's obvious why now, looking back. Trump on the campaign trail was talking about cooperating with Russia. He was saying things like, we don't want to get into a World War III over Ukraine. And he was running as an anti-war candidate. He was saying that we've spent all this money abroad and all we've done is create havoc in places like Iraq and Libya. And so if you're a neocon in Washington and in the Clinton campaign and you're hearing this and you're alarmed at the fact that not only is this message being spread, but that it's resonating with people, which it did at the time, you'll be threatened by that. And so the the Clinton campaign paid for the Steele dossier. People in the FBI who harbored this long time hostility toward Russia, Cold Warriors like James Clapper and Peter Strzok. James Clapper was the head of national intelligence at the time, John Brennan at the CIA. They all went along with this. And there's so much documentation now that all of them knew exactly what was going on. In late July 2016, just as the Trump-Russia investigation is opened up at the FBI, John Brennan goes to Barack Obama and warns him, yeah, we're aware that the Hillary Clinton campaign is trying to frame Trump as a Russian agent, and the Russians know about this. So they knew about this all along, but they all went along with it because in Washington, the commitment to maintaining the bipartisan consensus of permanent war and hostility towards countries like Russia, that just prevails. And Trump was seen at the time as an outsider who was not a suitable steward of the war machine. They didn't care that he was a bigot or a misogynist. They didn't care that he favors the wealthy and wants to basically steal from working people. They didn't see him as a suitable steward of the war machine. And they didn't like that he was honest sometimes about the nature of U.S. empire. And so they worked to sabotage him. After he won, he basically freestyled his way to victory. They doubled down and they used this as a way to rein him in, to box him in, to make sure that he didn't change anything about U.S. foreign policy, especially in countries like Ukraine and Syria, where the U.S. was running these proxy wars against Russia and its ally Syria. And so Russiagate was used to box him in, and the intelligence community took part in it. And I got involved because I saw during the campaign that like the Hillary Clinton campaign was building its messaging around Trump being a Russian sympathizer and how what a horrible thing that was. And I just thought, well, hey, this is really dumb, but this is like from a different era. This is McCarthyite. I thought we were past all that now. And I don't want to have a climate where it's like incentivized to warmonger with Russia because we're talking about the world's two top nuclear powers. And I just thought it was entrenching the power of neocons who should be discredited, especially after the Iraq War. And at a time when the Clinton campaign had just sabotaged Bernie Sanders, I saw this as their way, especially after the election, to avoid any self-reflection and to hold on to the party by blaming everything on Russia rather than their own neoliberal failures, which Bernie Sanders was the answer to. Because if there was genuine reflection after Hillary Clinton lost, they would have let Bernie Sanders and his movement take over the party because so many Trump voters I know would have gone for Bernie had he been an option for them because Bernie had an economic populist message and was also speaking about the toll of foreign wars. So to me, this was a neocon scam by the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party that fueled tensions with Russia, criminalized diplomacy with Russia. As a journalist, factually, it was just baseless. You could just tell from the start if you read any of the reporting and the documents that emerged from the Trump-Russia probe. There was nothing there. This idea of a conspiracy between Trump and Russia, it was so obvious what was going on. And politically, just speaking from like a leftist perspective, it was a big gift to Trump. Because if you're Donald Trump sitting in the White House, it's a huge gift if your opposition is forming itself around a dumb conspiracy theory that Robert Mueller is going to validate. And that, so rather than challenging Trump on his actual policies, like the tax cuts that favored the wealthy, people are organizing around the television, watching MSNBC every day, waiting for Robert Mueller to deliver the smoking gun of collusion. That's what the resistance was reduced to, basically, in those early years. So politically, I thought it was a disaster. Journalistically, it was a fraud. And as a journalist, if you take your job seriously, your job is to follow the facts. And the facts in Russiagate were all pointing to the fact that it was a scam. So I decided to go all in. And I knew at the time, by the way, that this would set me on a path that I could never come back from. Like once there was, it was so pervasive and such a dominant narrative, and the people who challenged it were so scorned and marginalized. I knew that once I came out against it, that I'd be on a certain path and kept out of certain media spaces forever. At the time, I was even applying for a job at MSNBC, which I knew I would definitely not get if I went all in on Russiagate. But I was like, you know, what's the point of being in journalism if I can't speak the truth, especially about something that's so dumb and so obviously dumb? And so I went all in.
I remember at the time thinking there's no way people are going to believe this.
They did.
And it went on for years.
So long.
And it was all people would talk about. Completely outrageous. It's interesting you say that they kind of used it to kind of rein Trump in, put pressure on him. It's funny because, you know, now he presents himself as like the anti-war candidate and he's against the Ukraine war, but he actively made that war possible by continuing to fund and arm and train you know, these Ukrainian, the Ukrainian military, essentially. He exacerbated the situation. So it just, I guess, goes to show like the power of the quote unquote deep state in these forces. Doesn't matter who's president, they're going to get what they want.
It was the worst of both worlds because Russiagate incentivized Trump to be hawkish against Russia. One of his kids even said that after he bombed Syria for the first time. One of his kids, I think Eric Trump, said, see, look, this shows that he's not in cahoots with Russia. So it incentivized Trump to be a hawk on Russia. And that's why he also caved to pressure to send weapons to Ukraine that Obama wouldn't even send, because Obama saw it was too escalatory. And he was worried about the weapons being given to neo-Nazis. Trump undid Obama's policy and sent weapons because Russiagate gave him an incentive to look tough, quote unquote, in Russia. And it also incentivized the media, because they were all in on this dumb conspiracy theory, to ignore all the countervailing evidence, not just in the details of Russiagate itself, but also in Trump's actions. So while Adam Schiff was saying that Trump is a puppy of Vladimir Putin, and the media was going along with this, it incentivized them to ignore it when Trump would do things like send weapons to Ukraine, or I think
They'd praise him for it.
And praise him for it. And more specifically, when he tore up the INF Treaty, this like really important arms control pact that had eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons, a crowning achievement of Reagan and Gorbachev, helped keep Europe and the rest of the world safe. Trump, listening to John Bolton, tore it up. And everyone just yawned. Democrats never talked about it, with the exception of maybe a couple times, maybe some. But like the far bigger deal was like, with the latest Mueller indictment of some Russian troll farm worker. And Rachel Maddow crying on TV that finally some Russian troll farm workers have been held to account. Not crying over the fact that Trump just made the world a lot more dangerous by tearing up the INF Treaty, which was a major factor in Russia's decision to invade Ukraine, because Russia invading Ukraine was trying to impose by force the terms that had been destroyed by the U.S. when it comes to things like arms control. And so this was their hope of basically using force to gain more leverage so they can have some sort of new agreement. It was a disaster. So Russiagate was an incentive for horrible journalism and a disaster for the world.
One thing that really infuriates me about both sides, Republicans and Democrats engage in this, but the Democrats especially, when they love to focus on how Trump tried to, quote unquote, steal the election in 2020, completely ignoring that Russiagate was Hillary's attempt to, if not steal the election, but at least call into question the authenticity of his victory in 2016.
Yeah. Hillary called Trump an illegitimate president. And they didn't try to overturn him with a 3-hour riot on Capitol Hill. They tried to overturn him and undermine him with a multi-year investigation by the FBI, which was baseless. And they knew it was baseless, and they kept going, even though they knew they had nothing to go on. The Russia investigation went from July 2016 until March 2018. That's a long time. That's the first half of Trump's presidency, basically. And after that failed, then they impeached him again because he paused some weapons to Ukraine while Rudy Giuliani was trying to pressure Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. So this consumed Trump's presidency. Russiagate was a lot more serious than January 6th. January 6th was a bunch of hooligans staging a riot. There's never a threat of the government being overthrown. Anybody who thinks otherwise is not thinking seriously. Russiagate was multi-years. It consumed everything. It escalated tensions with the world's other top nuclear power, made the world a lot more dangerous. So yeah, I think Russiagate was a lot worse than January 6th.